You crawl into bed tonight. You fluff the pillow, check your phone for 10 minutes, scrolling through videos of cats knocking things off counters, and after one unnecessary trip to the bathroom, you drift off. Easy, warm, genuinely kind of nice, if you stop to notice it. Now, picture doing all of that minus the pillow, minus the phone, minus the bed, minus the roof over your head, minus the locked door, minus basically everything you have ever associated with rest, and instead you are crouched at the edge of a clearing, wrapped in a stiff animal hide, listening to something heavy shifting through the brush maybe 30 feet away. That was an ordinary night for your ancestors. And here is the question almost nobody actually stops to ask. What did they actually do once it got dark? When the sun dropped, when the whole world turned pitch black, when the predators that had been sleeping all day suddenly woke up hungry, and your entire arsenal was a sharpened rock and cautious optimism, what exactly was the plan? Did they sleep straight through? Did they stay up on guard? Did they just sit frozen, bracing for the worst, like someone waiting on hold with customer service? Except the customer service is a leopard? Because you spend roughly a third of your entire life unconscious, and almost nobody stops to consider how completely different that experience used to be for nearly the whole of human history. The real answer turns out to be stranger, richer, and far more human than you would probably guess. Let's go all the way back, long before there was anything resembling a bedroom, long before there was fire anyone could reliably control, long before there was a single tool worth showing off. Early humans faced one plain, terrifying fact of daily existence. Roughly half of every single day happened in total darkness. Not the mild darkness of a streetlight leaking through your curtains, not the minor darkness of a dead phone battery and a fumble for the light switch. Real darkness, the kind where you hold your own hand up in front of your face and see absolutely nothing, where a single snapping twig could mean the difference between an ordinary night and the last one you ever had. If unpacking exactly how ancient people handled that kind of darkness sounds like the sort of deep dive worth sticking around for, subscribing means the next one shows up in your feed the moment it's ready. And in that darkness, things were actively hunting. Lions, hyenas, leopards, saber-toothed cats. Nearly every major predator of the ancient world falls into the category scientists call crepuscular or nocturnal, meaning most active at dawn, dusk, and throughout the night. Which means the moment the sun dropped below the horizon, early humans stopped being the ones doing the hunting and became, quite suddenly, a viable meal for something with vastly superior night vision. Nobody needed a forecast. The forecast was always the same: dark with a strong chance of being eaten. So what did you actually do about that? You grouped together. You found elevation, or enclosure, or some feature of the landscape you could use defensively. Caves became genuinely valuable real estate. Not for comfort, since damp stone and zero natural light offer very little of that, but because a cave gives you exactly one entrance to worry about. You put your back against solid rock and you know precisely which direction any danger has to come from. It was, in effect, the very first security system, and it worked. Groups slept pressed close together in these spaces, near enough to share warmth, near enough to hear each other's breathing shift, near enough that if something slipped in during the night, someone would know almost instantly. It was not cozy in any modern sense, but there was real safety in numbers that went beyond simple defense in bulk. With enough people sleeping close together, someone was always a lighter sleeper. Someone always stirred first. None of this required a leader assigning shifts or a formal plan written down anywhere. It simply emerged naturally out of enough bodies sharing one enclosed space night after night, an early warning system nobody had to consciously design. Then, roughly 400,000 years ago, everything changed. Fire. The moment humans gained reliable control over fire, the entire logic of nighttime survival shifted completely. Fire does something close to magical from a pure survival standpoint. It provides warmth, obviously. It allows cooking, which dramatically improves how many nutrients a body can actually absorb from food. But more than either of those, fire creates a boundary, a ring of light functioning as a wall between a person and the dark that is almost entirely psychological and yet completely effective in practice. Most large predators will not cross into firelight, not because flame physically stops them in any direct sense, but because their entire hunting strategy is built around operating in darkness, and an open fire represents a genuine disruption to that strategy, something confusing and unfamiliar. Sitting beside a fire, early humans were safer from predators not through strength or speed, but purely through light itself. That single behavioral shift, gathering deliberately around a controlled flame rather than simply hiding from the dark, effectively created the first shared, scheduled social space in human history, a fixed point every member of the group returned to at the same time each day, regardless of what they had been doing since sunrise. Here is the part that rarely gets enough attention, though. Fire did not just keep predators away. It appears to have fundamentally reshaped what human beings actually became as a species. Consider what happens once people are sitting around a shared fire at night. You cannot really accomplish anything in a conventional productive sense. You cannot read anything. You cannot write anything down. What you can do is sit, look at the people around you, and be genuinely present with them in a way the busy daylight hours rarely allow. Researchers studying present-day hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Ju-Hoansi of the Kalahari Desert and the Hadza of Tanzania, have documented something remarkable about this. Daytime conversation in these communities tends to stay almost entirely practical, coordinating who is hunting where, what needs gathering, basic daily logistics. Nighttime conversation around the fire looks completely different. At night, people tell stories. Long, elaborate, morally rich stories about ancestors, about the origin of the world, about what it actually means to be brave or generous or trustworthy. Researchers have found that a large majority of nighttime campfire conversation in these societies consists of storytelling, compared to only a small fraction of daytime conversation. Practical logistics during daylight. Stories once darkness fell. Every single night for tens of thousands of years, human beings gathered around fires and narrated the world to one another, doing essentially the same thing we now do with streaming platforms, novels, and films, trying to make sense of existence through character, conflict, and consequence. The fire functioned as the original cinema, and the storyteller functioned as the screen. This matters enormously because stories are how culture actually transmits itself across generations, how values and history and identity survive without any written record at all. Fire may not simply have kept early humans alive at night. It may have been one of the single most important catalysts behind language, empathy, cultural memory, and complex social bonding in our entire evolutionary history. Now, about actual sleep, because this is genuinely strange, and it might change how you feel the next time you wake up in the dead of night. Most of us assume the natural, correct way to sleep is a single, unbroken block lasting roughly 8 hours straight through the night. Wake up at some odd hour and lie there unable to drift back off. And the instinct is to assume something is wrong, to start worrying, to spiral into researching symptoms online. That assumption, it turns out, may be historically backward. A historian spent decades combing through thousands of historical records, private diaries, medical texts, court documents, and household accounts, and what turned up was genuinely striking. For most of recorded history, going back at least to medieval times and very likely far earlier, people did not sleep in a single block. They slept in two, referred to plainly as first sleep and second sleep. You would go to bed a couple of hours after nightfall, sleep for roughly 3 or 4 hours, then wake up naturally, calmly, not in distress, the way you might surface gently out of a pleasant dream. You would stay awake for perhaps an hour, sometimes closer to two, before drifting back into sleep until morning. This is documented consistently across cultures and centuries, referenced as far back as ancient epic poetry, mentioned by Roman writers the way you might casually mention breakfast, and thoroughly saturating medieval literature. Household records mention tasks completed during that middle waking period as entirely unremarkable, ordinary parts of the night. The old phrase about keeping watch in the night, familiar from religious texts and historical writing, does not always refer to military sentries. Very often, it simply describes ordinary people being routinely awake during the dark hours between the two sleeps. And what did people actually do during that waking window? Quite a lot, as it turns out. Many religious traditions considered the deep, quiet hours between midnight and dawn the most sacred window for spiritual reflection, when the world felt genuinely still. People thought carefully about their dreams, which were treated as far more meaningful than most modern people treat them. Some had sex, since the body was already warm and relaxed and there was nowhere pressing to be. People tended the fire, added fuel to keep it burning through the cold hours, checked on livestock, nursed infants, and in some towns, quietly visited neighbors who were also awake, moving through dark streets as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, because it was. This was never insomnia. It was never a disorder. It was simply the natural rhythm of the night, expressing itself in phases, the way it always had. The likely reason this pattern collapsed comes down almost entirely to artificial lighting. Once a space could stay brightly lit well into the evening, bedtime pushed later and later, total nightly sleep compressed, and the natural gap between first and second sleep folded into one continuous block, leaving anyone who still wakes in the middle of the night feeling like something has gone wrong rather than feeling like an ancient rhythm simply doing exactly what it was built to do. There is also direct modern experimental evidence backing this up, not just old documents. In a study conducted at a research institute in the 1990s, participants were placed in extended periods of darkness each day, roughly 14 hours with no artificial light at all, closely mimicking the natural night length of a pre-industrial winter. Within a matter of weeks, their sleep spontaneously reorganized itself into two distinct blocks, separated by 1 to 2 hours of calm, quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, essentially recreating first and second sleep under laboratory conditions using nothing but modern volunteers and the simple removal of electric light. In other words, this is not merely a historical curiosity confined to old diaries. It appears to be a default setting still sitting inside the modern human body, waiting for the right conditions to resurface. So, if you have ever woken at some odd hour feeling unexpectedly calm and clear headed, lying there thinking through your life for a while before drifting peacefully back to sleep, that is not a malfunction. That is not the beginning of a sleep disorder. That is, quite literally, an ancient biological rhythm reasserting itself exactly as intended. Let's go even further back, because the deeper you dig into how ancient humans actually slept, the more genuinely impressive it becomes. Early humans obviously had no beds in any modern sense, but they were not simply collapsing onto bare rock and hoping for the best either. Archaeological evidence from a cave site in South Africa suggests that as far back as 200,000 years ago, people were constructing deliberate sleeping platforms, carefully layered arrangements of grasses, leaves, and selected plant material. Beneath those layers, researchers found ash, not accidental residue from a nearby fire, but ash spread there on purpose. Ash repels insects, ticks, mites, fleas, all the small pests that bite through the night and can spread disease. Someone, 200,000 years ago, connected an itchy night to the ash nearby, tested the idea, confirmed it worked, and passed that knowledge along to others. That is the scientific method, quietly running inside a prehistoric mind applied directly to the very practical problem of sleeping more comfortably. These sleeping areas were also periodically refreshed and rebuilt entirely, old bedding cleared out and burned, fresh material laid down again, which suggests a level of ongoing maintenance closer to housekeeping than to simple survival improvisation. In colder regions, particularly across Ice Age Europe, the central challenge shifted from insects to raw temperature. Nighttime cold in that period could kill an unprotected person within hours. And the response was communal sleeping. Entire groups pressed together, functioning as a kind of living insulation system. This was not purely social bonding. It was straightforward thermal physics. More bodies packed into an enclosed space, meaning higher ambient warmth and better odds of surviving until morning. Within these groups, some individuals were naturally lighter sleepers, quicker to stir and rouse. Researchers suspect this variation in sleep depth across a group may itself have been shaped by evolution, since a group where every single member slept equally deeply was a group with no early warning system at all, while a group with a natural spread of sleep depths effectively had rotating sentries built in without anyone having to suffer through deliberate, exhausting night watch. The night was never only about survival and rest either. For nearly every ancient culture on record, night was the most spiritually charged period of the entire daily cycle, which makes a certain intuitive sense. The sun, the thing that made the world visible, warm, and alive, appeared to die every single evening, sinking beneath the horizon, and in the cosmology of countless ancient peoples, it descended into an underworld and had to fight its way back. Every sunrise counted as a genuine victory. The ancient Maya built entire calendar systems around the movement of celestial bodies only visible after dark, orienting major cities architecturally to align with specific star and planetary positions. One observatory was built specifically to track the movements of a single bright planet with remarkable precision, a planet closely tied to decisions about warfare. The night sky, in that context, was not decoration. It functioned as a genuine intelligence system, treated with the same seriousness modern institutions apply to actual surveillance. In ancient Mesopotamia, a specialized class of scholar priests devoted themselves entirely to reading the night sky for omens, treating every unusual celestial event as a message worth decoding: a comet, an eclipse, the specific behavior of a visible planet. Each one factored into decisions about warfare, farming, and diplomacy. The underlying method was flawed by modern standards, but the instinct behind it, searching for patterns in observable natural phenomena and using them to make better decisions, was genuinely scientific in spirit. Elsewhere, entirely different cultures built their own systems for reading the night sky as a practical tool rather than a religious one. Ancient astronomers in ancient China and separately across the ancient Islamic world both developed detailed systems dividing the night sky into 28 distinct lunar stations, tracking the moon's nightly position against those fixed divisions to build working calendars, predict seasonal change, and coordinate travel and agriculture with genuine precision, all without a single mechanical clock involved anywhere in the process. The Polynesian navigators accomplished something that still feels almost impossible once you fully understand it. Using no instruments whatsoever, no compass, no chart, they crossed the largest ocean on the planet in wooden outrigger canoes, locating tiny islands scattered across an expanse of open water larger than every landmass on Earth combined. They did the bulk of this, navigating at night, having memorized the rising and setting positions of hundreds of individual stars across different seasons and different latitudes. They read ocean swells, since different underlying currents produce distinctly different wave patterns you can feel through the hull even when you cannot see their source. They tracked bird flight patterns, since certain species reliably head toward land in the evening, and they read subtle cloud formations that tend to gather above islands long before land itself becomes visible. The night sky effectively became their entire navigation system, arguably more sophisticated in certain respects than anything available before satellite positioning existed. Practical night work shows up constantly across ancient cultures once you start looking for it. Iron Age metalworkers in parts of southern Africa deliberately fired their forges specifically at night, not out of habit, but because daylight washes out the extremely subtle color shifts in heated metal that indicate its precise temperature, information absolutely essential to working iron correctly. In one of the earliest true urban civilizations, built along the Indus River Valley, sanitation workers collected household waste specifically after dark, a scheduled, organized task functioning essentially as an ancient night shift. In parts of the ancient Arabian Peninsula, farmers deliberately irrigated crops overnight, specifically to reduce water loss to evaporation, a genuinely intelligent conservation strategy reached through pure, patient observation. In the far north, Norse communities burned fish oil and whale fat in lamps to light their longhouses through winter nights that can stretch nearly a full day in length, refusing to simply surrender to the darkness and instead building an entire lighting industry around outlasting it. Nighttime hunting itself was a deliberate strategy in several traditional societies, not simply something forced by circumstance. Certain groups in hot, arid environments would deliberately track and pursue prey animals specifically after dark or under a bright moon, avoiding the punishing daytime heat that exhausted both hunter and prey far faster than the cooler night air ever would, timing entire hunts around lunar brightness rather than sunlight for exactly that reason. So let's bring all of this together, because there is a genuine conclusion here, not simply a pile of interesting facts. When most people picture what ancient humans did at night, the image is small and frightened. People huddled on rocks, passively waiting for morning, enduring darkness rather than actually living inside it. Night treated as a gap, an absence, the part of the day when nothing real happened. That picture is essentially backward. Night was when humans first told the stories that eventually became culture. It was when people slept in two natural phases and woke calmly in between to think, to pray, to connect with each other. It was when groups held each other warm against cold that would otherwise have killed them outright. It was when priests read the sky for messages, when navigators crossed entire oceans guided by nothing but memorized stars and the feel of the water itself, when metal workers used darkness as a precision instrument, when farmers irrigated fields by moonlight to save every drop of water they could. Night was not empty. It was full, governed by an entirely different set of rules, demanding an entirely different set of skills, and producing an entirely different kind of meaning. But it was a world our ancestors had genuinely mapped, mastered, and made their own across hundreds of thousands of years. We traded a great deal of that away for electric light, which, to be completely fair, was absolutely worth it. Running water, modern medicine, instant communication, these are real, undeniable advantages. But something is genuinely lost in how thoroughly we have flattened the line between day and night, in how little most of us now know about the sky above our own heads, or the natural rhythms of our own bodies left alone without interference. So the next time you wake at some strange hour, thoughts moving clearly and calmly through your mind, resist the urge to panic. Resist the urge to reach immediately for a phone. Just lie there in the dark for a little while. Think through whatever needs thinking through. Be awake the way people have always been awake, in the deep, quiet middle of the night. Because that part of the day has always belonged to you too. You are not malfunctioning. You are simply remembering something your body was never actually supposed to forget in the first place. A rhythm that predates the bed, the phone, the pillow, and every other comfort now standing quietly between you and a version of the night your ancestors once knew intimately.